Andrea Mengucci is back with his weird takes on the modern format, specifically around Modern Horizons 3. You see this tweet on him wanting to print Stifle into the modern format to help fair decks punish fetch lands. Love to try it out at Murktide. Look, okay, a very experienced player, great player in general, and just doing a lot of great positive things for Magic. Sometimes though, the takes are a little L. You'll see this tweet also from Doomwake here, just showing, I think, my general reaction to the situation here. And I wanted to talk about this idea here and how Stifle effects are managed in Modern and why, right? And why we can't really have Stifle in Modern, like what that means in terms of a play pattern and why it's just going to be a net negative for the format. Now, just going into the card itself, Stifle, you know, it's called a Stifle effect for a reason, right? It's one of the original abilities, 1 blue for an instant that says counter target activated or triggered ability, right? So you can counter the ability of fetch lands, as Mengucci said, because that's an activated ability. You can counter triggered abilities like enter the battlefields. You can counter the activations of one rings as well. So there's a lot of valuable things that you can do with Stifle. Heck, if you're an arena player and you're playing Timeless, Stifle is, I would say, everywhere. Many blue decks are playing Stifle, unless you're playing hard combo. In that case, you're just increasing your density to just get to your combo. But any type of blue green X combo deck is playing Stifle because it's a punish piece for a reason. There's many deck lists out there that are using this card, especially in the legacy format. The type of decks that are using this, firstly, as a meme, you have Stifle Knot, which looks to use Phyrexian Dreadnought as a primary threat, a 1-mana 12/12 that has an enter the battlefield ability that gets you to sacrifice a bunch of things. But if you Stifle that, then essentially it's like a 2-mana 12/12, right? Because you use Stifle for one and Phyrexian Dreadnought for the other, and then it uses kind of a removal control package. Otherwise, you have Uro for mid range. It does all that stuff. You also have Sultai Scam, which doesn't really use Stifle as a playset, but it's more so a disruption piece. So a lot of times what you can do is not only can you grief and then Stifle the ability that gets you to sack the grief, but it can also be a punish piece as well to stop opposing kind of fetch lands and slow your opponent down. Ultimately, the deck is a scam deck using grief, but not only is it valuable on your end for the griefs, but is also valuable to stop your opponent. And then finally, I believe the only other deck list that really uses Stifle to a large degree in Legacy is Doomsday. Some deck lists will be playing 2 to 3 copies in the main board, whether that be for punishing effects or whatnot. I actually don't know if there is a use for Stifle in the main board for the Doomsday player other than for disruption. So if you know a use case for that, let me know in the comment section down below. I briefly touched Legacy. I'm not going to pretend to be a Legacy expert, but those are the primary ways that it's used in those formats where it's legal. But in Modern, we have something a little bit different, right? So I've been talking about a lot of examples in Legacy, but in Legacy, the concept of fair is very different, right? If you're a fair deck, generally speaking, you're playing some type of mid-range plan, maybe with creatures, but generally you're also doing something busted, or you're playing Force of Will, right? Force of Will Days, that's considered to be the fair decks, and then the non-fair decks are trying to force you to have the Days, force you to have the Force of Will, and stop you from there. Unfortunately, Modern, or maybe fortunately, whatever your view is, Modern isn't exactly that format. Modern has Force and Negation. Modern has other free counter spells as well, and now with Modern Horizons 3, it will have another suite of free spells as well. But it's important to note that the concept of free spells in Modern, they always have a cost, and the costs are all in. The effects are really powerful, but the costs are all in on those. You have to kind of build around those free effects. Force of Will in Legacy forces you to play a critical mass of blue spells, but if you're going to be kind of going into a plan like Rakdos Scam, you have to have a critical mass of red spells for the Fury pre-ban, but now you have to have a critical mass of black spells for the grief as well. And you're kind of all in on that grief. You're relying on that grief to be good enough to win the game from there. Heck, even Force and Negation, it's such a kind of tempo downswing there. Like, you're really using it to protect a combo piece in the Cascade decks, or you're using it as a one of in a fair deck, maybe to help resolve, or sorry, help stop something that your opponent is doing and whatnot, right? So there's a lot of ways that these free spells exist, but without the metagame that is Legacy, Stifle would be too overpowering. With the power that Daze and other free counter spells have, you can always stop them. You can always stop your opponent from having that Stifle, and then you can in the future play around that as well, right? Like in that format, you can stifle out your own arrows and stop them from being sacrificed and everything, right? So there's all that type of stuff. But you don't have that in Modern. Modern is more fair in that sense, right? There may be the whole concept of 2 ships passing in the night, where your opponent is just kind of playing out Tron, playing out Amulet, and you feel like you can't really do anything about it in the beginning. But really, it's about play patterns, right? What type of play pattern does Stifle force, right? And in Legacy, the type of play patterns is, heck, either disruption or just enabling cards that you have on your side. But in Modern, it's going to be about disruption, because at the end of the day, people are going to be looking to punish fetch lands. Right now in the current Modern metagame, there's a lot of 5-color, just multicolor, 2, 3, 4, 5-color nonsense going on in the format. You need fetches, right? And heck, even if it wasn't true, you're still playing fetches in your monocolor decks, in your 2-color decks, whatever it might be. Burn plays them as well. 2-color deck very lightly, but you are playing fetches not only to thin, but to grab the lands that you need, and also just to maybe create some shuffle scenarios. There's all these niches that you can enable with fetches, and that's really what it's solving. Stifle wants to be in these formats to stop the activated abilities of planeswalkers, but also help maybe really annoy the fetch players, because fetch lands are a format defining. They're really important to the formats that they're in, and it's important to be able to stop them, because if your opponent activates a fetch land, it's essentially like you destroyed that land or set them back a whole turn, because now they're not going to be able to get that land. And that's why we see different versions of fetches, or Stifle effects exist in the Modern format. And there's some various examples of them. So again, noting that Stifle is not currently legal in Modern. I hope I, got that point across at the beginning. But we have options like Defabricate, which is most recently printed in the Brothers War. This spell's actually pretty sick. You counter target artifact or enchantment spell, or activate or triggered ability. So you choose one, but it's 2 for an instant. Then you have something like Nimble Obstructionist. This hasn't been played in a really long time. It was a different era in Modern when this was, but this has a bit of a downside. So you don't get the counter target activator or triggered ability unless you cycle it. So you don't get to play the creature and have it come down as an ETB, and it's an activator or triggered ability that you don't control. So there's no sense of you stopping like a Lotus Field trigger that you get that forces you to sacrifice your other lands. So you can't really Nimble Obstructionist that. But there was a time when Nimble Obstructionist was like a nice little 1 of 2 of in control decks for the cycle ability. More, I guess, playable would be Tail's End, because Tail's End, activate or triggered ability for 2, again, noting the mana cost here, or you counter a legendary spell. So a lot of legendaries, heck, Planeswalkers are now legendary as well, as of a couple of years ago. So being able to counter to Fairy, Wrenn and 6, all that stuff, Tail's End has a lot of diversity in that sense. And then Trick Bind is kind of really nice in this sense, where Trick Bind has split second, so your opponents can't react to this, but again, it's 2 mana. But if you counter an activated ability, planeswalkers can't really take advantage of this, but if you counter an activated ability, they can't activate it again that turn. So if it's like a mana sink or something like an activated ability that doesn't require tap, they can't do that with Trick Bind. So you have some abilities there. Finally, the most playable one that's recognizable in Modern right now is probably Tishana's Tidebinder. And Tishana's Tidebinder, just very valuable blue creature in general. You don't need to be playing Merfolk for it. And the thing that you counter loses all abilities as long as Tishana is there. So the card's really good. Now, you'll notice that all of these cards don't cost 1. They cost 2 or more, or they have some type of downside, or, something's going on to create a downside, but mostly the mana cost. So Modern has never had, as far as I'm aware, doesn't really have that type of versatility at 1 mana. And I think that's the key, right? And I think many of you can conceptually understand this, but I think I need to state this to make this obvious for a lot of you. But there is a astronomical difference between 1 mana and 2 mana. There is an almost near infinite difference between 0 and 1, but 1 is half that of 2. 2 is double the cost of 1. And so you can't counter your opponent's turn 1 fetch line on the play if you don't have Stifle. But you can if you do. And that becomes a very problematic play pattern, in my opinion. You see this in Timeless as well, where the blue decks, you have to be aware if your opponent leaves a fetch and passes, and then you on your turn go to fetch and then do something proactive, you could get stifled, and then essentially you get time walked out of the game. The amount of astronomical value that has is unspeakable. right? Like you essentially stopped the land drop. You essentially got your opponent to F6 by stifling that turn 1 fetch sign. Obviously they could shock, play a basic, and move on from there. There aren't exactly, you know, super crazy ways or all the time that they're going to get punished, but countering an activated or triggered ability is a lot. You get to counter activated abilities of planeswalkers, triggered abilities of creatures, death triggers, whatever it might be. There's a lot of things that you can do with this card. And I think everything I want to highlight here is the fact that it really leads to not positive play patterns, right? Printing Stifle into Modern, I don't think adds to the positive play patterns. And now there's an argument to be made that these cards from Modern Horizons 3 don't exactly do that either. But I would argue that that's a whole set design. You would hope that they would do that they understand the testing involved to curate a format, and that printing a card like this into the Modern format in general, based on some of the recent banned and restricted announcements that have happened, isn't exactly helping that cause. They have banned cards in this format, citing the idea of positive play patterns, good play patterns, and that's what they generally want to be promoting in their BNRs. I don't think, especially with everything that I've highlighted in this video, that Stifle really does that. And that's ultimately why I think Andrea, great little wishlist card, but I do not want to be seeing Stifle in Modern. And heck, if we do, if Stifle gets printed into Modern with Modern Horizons 3, please quote this video, come back to this video, make fun of me, and just watch as I dig myself into a deep little hole. And I mean, heck, as a mill player, I'll probably be taking advantage of it too. It's probably astronomically correct for me to be playing a 4 of a prison piece like that to further punish my opponent. We're already playing the archive traps. We're already playing the surgical extractions to take out the combo decks. It's a bit of a counter synergy when it comes to archive trap, but as a mill player, I probably will have to be forcing myself to play a playset of that card. It does help the whole mono blue argument, I guess. But regardless, we don't need Stifle in Modern. That's probably a net mistake. Let's go for new designs and new cards instead of bringing back the busted things from old Magic.